Libra, someone is ashamed of what they did to you. You think you know this story. Someone did something wrong to you, life went on, and you moved on as best you could. But what if I told you that at this very moment, while you're watching this video, the person who hurt you is carrying a weight you've never seen before? Not as a theory, not as speculation. As a fact that changes everything you thought about what happened, about whether you overreacted, about whether what you felt was real. Libra has a very specific tendency to silently wonder if they were right to feel what they felt, to rewrite what happened until the wound seems less serious, to seek harmony even when the price of that harmony is self-doubt. This video won't tell you how to forgive. It will show you something different, something Libra rarely receives, confirmation that the pain was real, that you didn't exaggerate, and that the person who did this to you knows. Libra has a skill that few people possess, the ability to rewrite, not dishonestly but generously. You take what happened and start adding context. You begin to think about what that person was going through, their motives, their life story. And then, very slowly, what was a stain begins to become part of a larger picture. You draw around the stain until it no longer looks like a stain, until it seems like it was part of the plan, until you can no longer distinguish where the original wound was. And that seems like wisdom. From the outside, it seems like maturity. It seems like you've grown, that you've evolved, that you're a person who understands that life is complex and people are imperfect. And maybe it is all of that too. But there's another layer beneath it, one that Libra rarely admits, not even to themselves. That part of rewriting this story is because looking at it as it really was hurts in a way that you still don't know what to do about. That accepting that it was unfair, that it was wrong, that you deserved more than you received, that demands something from you that no one ever taught you to offer yourself. The right to be right without having to prove it to anyone. And then there's the quietest part of all this, the part that changes everything when you finally understand what was happening on the other side. Because while you spent the following months and years wondering if you had exaggerated, doubting the extent of your own pain, questioning whether you had the right to be so hurt, the person who did that to you carried something you never saw. They carried the shame of what they did, and this is where everything changes. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book, The Divine Path, that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose. What surprised me most wasn't a technique or a recipe. It was the way it names exactly this Libra pattern, this cycle of absorbing, rewriting, and moving on without validation, and transforms it into clarity. Instead of telling you what to do, it helps you understand why you do what you do. And when you understand that, the way you position yourself in your relationships changes. Not because you become colder, but because you stop asking emotional permission to feel what you already feel. You are currently in a very specific moment, recognizing something, still with that question in the air, does the shame the other person feels release me from something? This is exactly the state in which the divine path that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose was designed to meet you. Not when you are already well, but when you are in the midst of recognition, still processing, and needing something to organize what is emerging from within. The link is in the first pinned comment. But be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. And while you're thinking about this, tell me in the comments, is there something that happened to you that you never called an injustice, but that, if you're being completely honest, was? Write it below. And now that you know this, there's something that needs to be said clearly. You never received confirmation that what happened to you was wrong. And you learned to live without it. You learned to function without that external validation, but what nobody tells you is the real price of that. Not the immediate emotional price. You already know that. You've already processed it. You've already worked through it as best you could. The price that lies beneath all of that, the identity price. Think of a sponge. A sponge that absorbs, 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 because that's its nature, the function it was made to fulfill. But a sponge needs to be wrung out from time to time to release what it has absorbed. Otherwise, it becomes heavy. It stops absorbing well. It starts accumulating what it should have released, and yet it continues to appear intact on the outside, because the deterioration of a saturated sponge is invisible until the moment it simply stops working the way it should. This is exactly how the cost of constant harmony works in Libra. It's not an explosion. It's not a visible collapse that you can point to and name. It's a silent saturation that happens over time, in layers, in adjustments so small that you don't even notice them happening. You absorb what isn't yours, the other person's negligence, the unasked apology, the uncertainty about whether you had the right to react, and you become heavier. More tired of a tiredness that has no obvious name, because it's not explicit physical or emotional exhaustion. It's the tiredness of carrying weight without ever being allowed to name where it came from. And the price of that isn't abstract. The price is concrete, it's everyday. It's the way you enter new relationships already calibrated to endure more than you should. Already with the meter set lower, already with the ruler of what's acceptable shifted a few centimeters below where it should be. Not because you want it, not because you decided, but because what the body learns through repetition, it normalizes. And what has been normalized no longer hurts in the same way. It simply becomes the background noise that you no longer notice because it's always there. But the noise is still there. There is a trial that took place. Guilt exists, a mistake was made, that's a fact. But the verdict was never read to you. The sentence exists in the most private court there is, within the one who erred, but the verdict was never declared for the one who suffered the consequence. And an unexecuted sentence leaves no one free. It leaves everything suspended. It leaves that weight hanging, without address, without destination. And you, without knowing this, without having had access to this information, wondered if the court had even met. If what happened had left any mark on the other side, or if it had simply been forgotten, discarded, treated as irrelevant. That unspoken question, did it matter, is one of the heaviest burdens Libra carries, and that's exactly where the divine path that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose comes in a way that few things can. Not with a ready-made answer, not with a formula, but with a deep understanding of the pattern of how Libra operates, where the sponge became saturated, and how to begin to wring out what has accumulated without needing external repair that may never come in the expected form. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. But there's something more that needs to be faced. Something Libra almost never considers because it's so focused on understanding, on forgiving, on finding peace that it never stops to think about what happened on the other side of the story. Afterwards. After the scene ended, after you moved on as best you could, after life went on as it always does, regardless of how we feel. The person who did this to you continued to exist. They continued to have days, nights, conversations, silences. They continued to look at themselves in the mirror, sit at the table, have thoughts that came and went. And at some point, perhaps many times over the months and years, what they did to you returned, not necessarily with articulated guilt, not necessarily with a clear awareness of the impact, but it returned, like a shadow that appears when the light changes angle, like a discomfort that arises for no apparent reason at unexpected times, on a quiet afternoon, in a moment between one thing and another, in a conversation that touched on a subject they preferred not to discuss. Shame is like that. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't announce its arrival. It appears when the environment is quiet enough for it to be heard. And it has a very specific characteristic. It's not confused with sadness, nor with explicit and elaborate regret. Shame is quieter, more internal. It's the discomfort of knowing, without having to consciously think about it, that you did something you shouldn't have done, that you left a mark that wasn't yours to leave. And while you stood here by your side, wondering if you had exaggerated, doubting the validity of your pain, this person knew. On the level where one knows things that are never spoken aloud, things that exist before language and after it, she knew she had done something she shouldn't have done, and she carried it. Silently, in a way that perhaps even she herself couldn't name, she carried it. You never saw this side of the story. You only saw the absence of an apology and, very naturally, very humanly, interpreted it as indifference. As if the other person simply didn't care. As if what happened hadn't left any mark on the other side. But indifference and incapacity seem identical from the outside. The difference lies in what happens inside each one. Indifference feels nothing. Incapability feels, but cannot transform what it feels into restorative action. And Libra, who always gave the other person the benefit of the doubt in everything, curiously never considered this specific benefit. Never stopped to think that the absence of an apology could be incapacity, not absolution of guilt. This distinction changes the whole picture, not because it makes what was done acceptable, it doesn't. Not because it justifies what happened, it doesn't. But because it removes from you the heaviest conclusion you silently drew, that it didn't matter enough for the other person to feel bad about what they did. It did matter. The other person felt bad. It just never reached you in the way it needed to. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. And that brings us to the most difficult point of all, the point that Libra needs to hear, even if it hurts a little before it eases, even if it's strange to receive this from a video on an ordinary day without ceremony or special preparation. You were right. Not in everything, not always, not in every situation in your life, but in this one. In what happened to you that remained nameless, unresolved, without the recognition it deserved. What happened to you was real. The pain you felt was proportional. The injustice existed. You didn't exaggerate. You didn't invent it. You weren't too sensitive or too needy or too difficult or too complicated. What happened to you was wrong, and the proof of that no longer needs to come from the mouth of the person who erred. Because the shame they carry, even in silence, even without ever having said anything directly to you, is the proof. It's the recognition that existed on their side even when they never crossed the distance to you. And that changes something, not the past. The past remains exactly as it was, unchanged, with all its difficult contours. But it changes the weight you carried about whether you were right to feel what you felt. It changes the silent question you asked yourself in the quietest moments. You were right, and you always were. Libra has this very particular tendency to need the scales to be visibly balanced before feeling authorized to move. It needs both sides to be at the same level, the symmetry to be visible, the other side to confirm what it feels before it can act based on those feelings. It's a form of honesty that becomes a trap, because real balance doesn't always come that way. Sometimes the scales return to the center, not because someone added weight to the other side, but because you removed what wasn't yours to carry. The weight of self-doubt, the weight of having to prove that the pain was legitimate, the weight of waiting for confirmation that may never come in the way you imagined, or that has already come in the quietest and most indirect way possible, in the shame that the other person carries without you having needed to be present to witness it. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. And what remains when you remove that weight? You stay. Libra stays. but a Libra that no longer needs to shrink to fit into the space that other people make available. A Libra that has learned the difference between forgiving and minimizing, that understands that generosity towards others doesn't have to cost them their self-perception, that knows that seeking harmony and recognizing injustice are not opposing forces. They are in fact part of the same integrity. Because Libra is not the sign of peace at any cost, Libra is the sign of justice, and justice begins within. It begins the moment you stop judging yourself for feeling what you felt. It begins when you stop rewriting what happened to make the other person more palatable and allow the story to be what it was, difficult, real, unfair in parts. And then something else can begin. Not a life without pain that doesn't exist for anyone, but a life where the pain you feel doesn't need to be justified, proven, edited before it becomes yours. A life where you enter relationships knowing the extent of what you have to offer, and where that isn't negotiated in silence for fear that your worth will break some fragile harmony. What was done to you happened. The shame the other person carries confirms it, even without words, even without you knowing exactly how much. And you can leave here without apologizing. You can leave here without confession, without formal acknowledgement, without the scene of reparation you deserved. And yet, and this is the quietest and most powerful twist in this whole story, you can leave here knowing you were right. Not as a victory over someone, not as settling a score, but as something much quieter and much more solid, as clarity, as the feeling that you can finally stop wondering if what you felt was real. It was real. You knew it all along. You just needed a moment to stop doubting. Looking at this pattern made me understand why the divine path that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose resonates so much with Libra. Because it doesn't treat harmony as destiny, but as a result of knowing who you are. And Libra carries an inner compass that points to what is true, just, and right, but it spends so much time considering others that it sometimes forgets to point that compass inward, to ask itself, and what is fair for me? What do I deserve? What is true in my experience, regardless of whether someone confirms it or not? This question doesn't have an answer that comes from the outside. It has an answer that you already carry, that you've always carried, and that today, here in this moment without ceremony or special preparation, has become a little easier to hear. The scale doesn't need another side to balance when you finally put on the plates only what is yours, only what is true, only what you, without needing anyone to confirm, already know is real. And there's something very specific that happens when Libra finally stops asking for that permission, when they stop seeking validation in the other person's eyes that what they feel is true. It's a small, almost imperceptible moment without fanfare or dramatic revelation. It's more like a settling down. Like when you finally stop holding the weight you were carrying above your head and it simply descends. It doesn't fall, it doesn't crumble, it just rests where it should have rested from the beginning. Libra found peace in the wrong ways for too long. She found peace by giving in when she didn't want to. She found peace by being silent when she wanted to speak. She found peace by choosing what was comfortable for everyone else, but not for herself. And what she discovered in this process was a superficial peace, beautiful on the outside, like a tidy room before guests arrive, but empty of something essential, the feeling that that peace was built with her truth included, not despite it. The peace Libra deserves is deeper, more solid. It's the peace of someone who no longer needs to rewrite what happened to move on. Of someone who can look at the whole story, with its blemishes, its imbalances, the moments when they should have spoken but didn't, and say, that's how it was. It was real. I felt what I felt, and I'm okay.